Which conspiracy theory do you secretly believe? Story 1. Ireland began deliberately entering bad songs into the Eurovision Song Contest in the 90s. After winning it consecutively for a few years, it began getting too expensive to host, so they sabotaged their chances of winning it. Story 2. Build-A-Bear came out with a bunch of new toys that were all of the same shade of yellow right after their Minion launch severely underperformed. They had stockpiled yellow fabric in anticipation of the Minion toys selling well and getting a big production run and had to find a way to use it all. Story 3. That the Imagineers at Disney World were certain that Hillary Clinton would win the 2016 election, so they started working on her animatronic for the Hall of Presidents before the actual election date to save time. Then when Trump won, they panicked and made the internal decision to alter the existing Hillary build rather than start from scratch. If you ever see a picture of the Trump animatronic, you can never unsee it. Story 4. Recycling is a scam, at least in the US. Most plastics are produced and used by giant corporations in production and shipping and will never be seen by the public. Nothing I do is ever going to change that. The US isn't capable of handling recycling. Most of our recyclables used to go to China, and now they just go to landfills. Most recyclables aren't actually recyclable. Most of the recycling propaganda you see today is actually paid for by the biggest plastic producers. Story 5. I wish there was a good someone killed President Harding conspiracy theory, and there just isn't. Like, all of the pieces are there. Sudden natural death while on a trip, political and personal scandals. But there's no the CIA killed Kennedy for Harding. Gah! Story 6. Certain companies were actively dismantled by consulting groups who simultaneously worked and continue to work with the financial sector to short said companies and rake in trillions of dollars while stealing lucrative market share from targets and providing it to a few monopolies. Read Amazon. Amazon killed commerce. Hedge funds helped. Story 7. Bill never cheated on Hillary. They had an open marriage, always traveling, rarely together, and infidelity was easier for the public to stomach than a swinging president and first lady. Story 8. Any of y'all watch that new documentary series on Netflix? It's called American Conspiracy, The Octopus Murders. I knew next to nothing about any of it going in, but there are pretty strong cases to be made that there's definitely something there. At the very least, it's a reminder that the government has done some absolutely horrendous things. Story 9. Scientology has private plastic surgeons to help hide criminals. Read an article on it a few years ago and say this is true. Tried looking it up again, but Google has been removing search results, so finding the article is difficult. Story 10. In the Bible, when Jesus was being born, there was no room for his folks at the inn. If time travel becomes real, the most popular place to visit would be Bethlehem when Jesus was born. The inns were full because of time travelers. Story 11. The U.S. stock market has become the biggest scam in human history, where its purpose is to keep the rich richer than everyone else, and also make it so they can't lose their money unless the rich asshole club decided to throw certain people, anyone who defies them or they just don't like, under the bus. Story 12. All social media platforms, Reddit, IG, FB, X, etc., have fake accounts, bot accounts created by themselves that comment basic, general, and polarizing statements to increase user retention in order to keep user engagement high so they can sell ads at a higher price. It's also a reason why they aren't in a hurry to ban these bot accounts from foreign political camps. It's an election year, so we will see a high spike in this users and comments. Their names, comments, behavior, subbed content are almost always the same. Story 13. Roswell, in a nutshell. The base commander instructed the intelligence officer in charge of the world's only nuclear strike force sitting on the runway to make a public news release to the Roswell Daily Record, acknowledging the fact they were in possession of an alien spacecraft. Story 14. The trillions of dollars printed up over the last 15 years or so went into very few hands. Most of it is stuck in Swiss bank accounts, but it is slowly being used to buy up all single-family housing in this country. The initial phase is complete as hedge funds have slowed down the buying spree, but it will kick back up as all the baby boomers die off. In about 20 years, 75% of all single-family homes will be owned by a corporation or hedge fund. Story 15. That conspiracy theorist was pushed as a pejorative term by groups which actually engage in conspiracy in order to paint whistleblowers are loonies. You can quickly peruse history and see that most of the major events that have shaped the modern world were a result of wealthy and powerful entities conspiring to enact their own visions and goals. Story 16. That the Illuminati exist, or at least it did in the form of elite corporate and political power dynamics in the Western world. But once they got to a certain level of sophistication, they didn't have to pull strings behind the scenes anymore, and so they gave it up. The system is self-sustaining on a greater than human timescale now, so the original Illuminati are no longer needed. Story 17. The super rich are actively pushing for and collectively planning for their own non-religious end times, where they think they will survive, but everything and most people suffer and die. This plan has them building their underground lairs, topping off their hidden stockpiles of supplies and weapons, and booby-trapped secret islands manned by a private army to watch the world burn down as they helped set it all on fire. And as resources deplete, they will continue to reap massive profits instead of helping to fix things. Story 18. That Donald Trump is owned and operated by the Russian government, and all of the trouble Western nations like the US, UK, France, and Poland, to name a few, have been having for the last 10 years or so with conservative nationalist movements have all been caused by the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. Story 19. Oswald was a patsy. The guy was too simple to pull off a presidential assassination. Whether it was the CIA, mob, or someone else, they found the right annoying guy to pin it on. Story 20. I think it's funny that people are okay with getting their information and data collected. I always hear, "I have nothing to hide." It is not about being innocent. It's about your data being used against you to manipulate you. Your buying habits, or worse. It only has to fall into the wrong hands, which are the ones that are already collecting it. Story 21. Putin has major dirt on Trump and has him by his wrinkly little balls. This is also why so many Joe fascist Congress members are against aid for Ukraine. Putin threatened them that he would out their grotesque orange bejesus if they support it. No proof, of course, but Occam's razor and all. Story 22. Donald Trump definitely colluded with Russia. It was far more overt and concrete than most people realize. Manafort gave the Russians district-level voter data on key swing state district to target with misinformation. Trump will do so again this year. Story 23. I wouldn't go so far as to say I genuinely believe this really truly, but the simulation theory is really very convincing. I know it's just the spotlight effect at play, but, I really do feel like the main character, and it's extremely difficult for me to conceptualize the surely true fact that literally everyone else feels the same way as I do. Story 24. That the current disillusionment with Biden among young American non-conservatives is at least fanned by and maybe planned by Russian social media operations. The fact that you see more blame put on Biden, while Netanyahu is almost completely absent from reports and social media posts about the war, is just so fucking strange. The fact that it's often intimately linked to the war in Ukraine in the social media narrative is just the cherry on top. It's funny how the Syrian civil war, which Russia is involved in, did not get mentioned to the same degree in relation to Ukraine. Story 25. Food is making us sick and the food companies are in cahoots with Big Pharma. It's bullshit. I was full-blown diabetic by 28, and all this body positivity movement kinda wasn't doing me any favors. We should culturally be more focused on health and food equity. Love your body at every size, but also size is an indicator of bad health. And some folks don't have access to fresh food, health education, or adequate health care. It's bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. Story 26. The 1% bought our government and the political parties, got them to pass the Citizen United to legalize the buying of our representatives, and now are fucking us to debt, so that we will have to work for free to pay off our debt to them, even though we'll continue to owe more to them because nothing will be affordable. This is simply based off the fact that they are keeping wages low, while increasing the prices of everything else, and they government hasn't done a damn thing except for pitting us against each other, forcing us to have babies while complaining about birth rates, wasting a lot of time and energy on trans people and other controversies that all only affect a very small percentage of the population, when other things greatly affecting the majority, like the cost of living, housing, and basic necessities are being ignored. Then they have the audacity to ask why the homeless situation and drug use is so bad. It's like, hello? When life fucks you over to the point of homelessness, wouldn't you want to escape that? I would. Nobody wants to be homeless, and you can't get a job and magically be not homeless. In fact, you can't really get a job if you don't have a home or phone. You're truly fucked. Tax the fucking rich, get the right people into office, get rid of Citizen United, and force your representative to do their fucking job. Rich people don't belong in public service because they only know how to serve themselves. Story 27. I believe that the uptick in flat eartherism in the early 2010s was a trial balloon by the IRA and other bad actors like Sean Bannon to basically understand virality and identify how to isolate and brainwash an audience. They put those lessons into practice to produce the MAGA movement of 2016 into now. Story 28. That the United States knew that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor and moved their aircraft carriers out of the harbor. They did not evacuate the whole base because they needed public opinion to change on getting involved in the war. Story 29. COVID-19 was created at the WIV, partially with DARPA funding and likely with the cooperation of the PLA. The virus was deliberately bioengineered to increase both the infectiousness and lethality of the virus. Those who protested strongly that the lab leak theory couldn't have been the case all had large and obvious conflicts of interest. I think that many people are now straining to deny these ideas regardless of evidence that gets stronger every day because they don't want to be perceived to be MAGA or whatever. I also think that the media's almost total unwillingness to even cover this story is a shocking and even suspicious dereliction of journalistic duty. Story 30. It was common wisdom in the U.S. in the 90s and early 00s, at least in my neck of the woods, that you weren't ever supposed to flash your brights at someone with their headlights off at night as a way to say, "Hey, turn your lights on." The rumor was that gang members would intentionally drive around without their lights on waiting for someone to flash them. They would then kill the persons who flashed them. It was apparently an initiation thing, and it always smelled like bullshit. Especially in hindsight. The theory now that it was just one of those chain email things that got out of hand, just complete bullshit that got picked up by too many people. However, I believe that this rumor was started and popularized by the police in order to cut down on people helping other people out, so that they could give out more tickets to drivers without lights on. Story 31. I fully believe that Area 51 does not have aliens. I think it was a rumor orchestrated to cover up any wild experiment consequences that could be observed from outside. Bright flash? Oh, alien research, not a new weapons test. Increased levels of radiation? Definitely not an atomic bomb test, gotta be those aliens. Story 32. That the crises around the world in recent years follow some sort of script or are being orchestrated like a playbook by someone somehow. That a literal robbery of the tax-paying people via increased prices is masqueraded as inflation when it is just a coordinated cash grab. That really influential and successful people in the entertainment industry are selected to be successful and play a role assigned to them. Story 33. The RNC are trying to recreate Xi's rise to power with their own party and leaders. One of the ways Xi took power was by having his party disguise another political group that opposed him. When they won, they simply switched sides. Of course, I'm paraphrasing a very complicated situation. We see in LA a bunch of people who are running under the Democratic ticket who specifically have Republican backers. Story 34. That Drumpf is a lunatic and is being propped up by self-indulgent and narcissists that only want power for the sake of power. It is, legitimately and by definition, a conspiracy theory. There are a group of people around him that know that he's out of his mind and they will use him as a mask to achieve their own goals. Literally, that is a conspiracy theory. That doesn't mean it's incorrect, nor does it mean that it's crazy. There's a conspiracy to have Drumpf hold the White House again. Story 35. The crack epidemic was orchestrated by our government to support resistance fighters in Southern American countries who were against the Communist Party Soviet Union. Basically, we tolerated or condoned the sale of drugs into American inner cities in order to fund resistance groups in South America, devastating inner-city residents. Zootopia is strangely enough interpreted as a children's allegory for this conspiracy theory. Story 36. My conspiracy theory. The Florida government lied about the severity of Hurricane Ian in 2022 prior to it making landfall. I'd like to think they did so for good reasons, but the end result is over. 100 people died, who otherwise might have evacuated if they had known how bad the storm would be. In the lead-up to the hurricane, it was on track to hit Tampa, which somehow miraculously always avoids hurricanes. People were warned early on to get out, and they did, mostly moving inland and north and south. The hurricane was projected to be a Category 3 at the time, but the day before it made landfall, it suddenly moved south. The projected severity also increased, but the government swore up and down that it would only be a Category 4. They told people to stay home and ride it out. Everyone knows Category 5 means complete destruction. But Category 4? Well, it might be rough, but you can live through that, right? 6 months later, post-storm analysis showed that it was a Category 5. My conspiracy theory is that the DeSantis government knew the storm was increasing in severity and may even hit Category 5, but because the Tampa area had been told for days to flee, all the hotels nearby were already fully taken up. So once the projected path moved south toward Fort Myers, the government downplayed the projected severity and cautioned residents who hadn't evacuated to shelter in place, which, due to the high floodwaters, ended up with dozens drowning in their homes. The alternative may well have been worse, people clogging the roads trying to escape at the last minute and failing to find anywhere to stay due to all the hotels in the area being already filled and getting caught in the storm. It was a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, but it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. FL residents were told the storm wouldn't be a Category 5. People are stubborn, but everyone knows Category 5 means you run. But the government was afraid that it was too late, so they downplayed the severity, and dozens drowned in the Fort Myers area in their homes, rather than hundreds dying from the storm while stuck on the roads. Story 37. I have my own conspiracy theory if that counts. This one is political, but hear me out. Political discourse has become quite polarized. I think we can agree, right? Well, a lot of the stuff you hear from both sides just seems so ridiculous and outlandish, almost as if it's satire of what each side picks on the other for. So my theory is, both the left and right sides of the political aisle are full of fakes. Each side has planted people in opposition to make them look as bad as possible. Political party double agents, if you will. It's almost as if the left is behaving how the right imagines the left behaves, and vice versa. That is to say, Trump was actually pushed forwards by the Democrats as a babbling, insensitive buffoon that fits the image of the worst Republican that should be easy to beat in an election. Unfortunately for them, the Republicans pushed forward Biden, the political nothing-burger that can't actually make decisions or get things done. Coincidentally, a common critique against liberals. So here we are watching an election where each side is trying their hardest to lose the election for the other. Disclaimer: I don't really completely believe this all the way deep down, but I certainly keep having these little moments where I come back to my theory. These parties and elections feel like such a joke at times, and I often wonder if I'm on to something.